Imagine a world, not the world we know, with its defined borders and established empires, but a vast and complex mosaic of cultures, city-states, and kingdoms, all in the shadow of a giant. Think of the 4th century BCE, an era of intense transformation in the Mediterranean and the Near East. Greece, the cradle of philosophy and democracy, was exhausted by decades of fratricidal wars, its once glorious city-states weakened and divided. To the east, the Achaemenid Persian Empire, a colossus stretching from Asia Minor to India, ruled with an opulence and military might that seemed unshakable. However, beneath the surface of this apparent order, a silent effervescence was beginning to bubble. The ideas of freedom and self-governance, born in Greece, conflicted with the reality of empires. Loyalty to ancient gods was questioned by new philosophies. The air was charged with a sense of impending change, that the balance of power was about to irreversibly shift. Like a dormant volcano beginning to tremble, the ancient world was on the brink of a seismic transformation, about to explode in a quest for dominion and glory that would redefine the political and cultural geography of 3 continents. This is not just a tale of kings and kingdoms, but the saga of an era writhing under the pressure of new ambitions, of a millennia-old power that would be challenged by an unexpected force. And at the center of this storm, a figure would emerge who, with his military genius, his vision, and his passion, would shape the destiny of entire nations, becoming the greatest conqueror the world has ever known. To understand the magnitude of the figure who would emerge from this turbulent scenario, one must delve into the roots of his own kingdom, Macedon. Far from the sophisticated city-states of southern Greece, Macedon was, until the 4th century BCE, a peripheral kingdom, often considered barbarian by the Athenians and Spartans. It was a land of mountains, fertile valleys, and dense forests, with a population of farmers and warriors. However, this perception would change drastically with the ascension of Philip II. Alexander's father, Philip, was a military and political genius who transformed Macedon from a marginal kingdom into a hegemonic power in Greece. He was not a king content with the status quo. He was a visionary with relentless ambition. Philip II reformed the Macedonian army, creating the famous Macedonian phalanx, an unbeatable infantry formation armed with long spears, sarissons, that could reach up to 6 meters in length. He also improved cavalry and siege engineering, making his army an unprecedented war machine. Through a combination of astute diplomacy, bribery, and military force, Philip II subjugated the Greek city-states, culminating in the decisive victory at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE, where Macedonian forces, led by Philip and his young son Alexander, crushed the combined armies of Athens and Thebes. This victory sealed Macedonian dominance over Greece and unified the Greeks under Philip's leadership. Philip's great dream was to lead a pan-Hellenic crusade against the Persian Empire in revenge for previous Persian invasions and to liberate the Greek cities of Asia Minor. He had begun preparations for this vast expedition, but his assassination in 336 BCE interrupted his plans. Philip II not only left a formidable army and a unified Greece, he left a legacy of ambition and a path laid out for his son, a path that Alexander would follow with a ferocity and grandeur that would far exceed his father's expectations. While Macedon emerged as a new power in the West, to the east stretched an empire that for centuries had been the largest and wealthiest in the known world, the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Founded by Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BCE, this colossus extended from Asia Minor and Egypt in the west to India in the east. It was an empire of vast riches, diverse cultures, and military might that seemed unshakable. The Persian Empire was known for its opulence, its magnificent cities like Persepolis and Susa, its well-built roads like the Royal Road, and its sophisticated administrative system. It governed a myriad of peoples, each with their own languages, customs, and religions, but all united under the authority of the great king, the King of Kings. Its religious and cultural tolerance was remarkable for the time, allowing conquered peoples to maintain their traditions as long as they paid tribute and provided soldiers for the Persian army. The Persian army was vast, composed of hundreds of thousands of warriors from various ethnicities, including the famous elite guard, the Immortals. They were masters of cavalry and archery, and their ability to mobilize resources and men from across the empire was impressive. Their navy dominated the eastern Mediterranean, and their fortresses were considered impregnable. However, in the years leading up to Alexander's ascension, the Persian Empire, though still powerful, showed signs of weakness. The vast extent of the empire made centralized control difficult, and palace intrigues and revolts by satraps, or provincial governors, were increasingly frequent. Its military machine, though numerous, lacked the discipline and tactical cohesion of the Macedonian army. The great king, Darius III, who ascended to the throne in 336 BCE, was a competent leader, but he did not possess the charisma or military genius of his predecessors. The Colossus of the East, though still imposing, was about to face a challenge it never expected. It was in this scenario of a world on the verge of a monumental transformation, where Macedon was emerging and Persia, though powerful, showed signs of fragility, that in July 356 BCE, in the city of Pella, the capital of Macedon, Alexander was born. Son of Philip II, the king who had transformed Macedon, and Olympias, a princess from Epirus, his arrival into the world was shrouded in legends and omens that foretold an extraordinary life. The most famous legend recounts that on the night of his birth, the temple of Artemis in Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, was burned down. This event, though a coincidence, was interpreted as a sign that a great force had been born, one that would bring both destruction and renewal. Other omens included a dream of Olympias, where a lightning bolt struck her womb, and the belief that Alexander was the son of Zeus and not Philip, a legend that Alexander himself would embrace. His mother, Olympias, was a complex and influential figure. A woman of great passion and ambition, she was devoted to mystical cults and believed in Alexander's divine ancestry. Her relationship with Philip was tempestuous, marked by jealousy and intrigue, but her influence over Alexander would be profound, instilling in him a sense of destiny and a belief in his own divinity. His father, Philip II, in turn was a pragmatic and military genius. He recognized Alexander's precocious talent and ensured he received the best possible education. Alexander's childhood was spent at the Macedonian court, where he was trained in the arts of war, horsemanship, and diplomacy. He learned to fight, to lead men, and to understand the complexities of politics. This combination of a mystical mother and a pragmatic father, of divine legends and rigorous military training, forged in Alexander a unique personality, a man of great intellect, passion, and ambition, with an unshakable belief in his own destiny. The stage was set for the emergence of a leader who, through his military genius and vision, would forever change the course of world history.
From his earliest years, Alexander demonstrated an unshakable need to go further, to conquer, to overcome. It was not just common ambition, it was a visceral impulse, a thirst for glory and recognition that would drive him to unprecedented feats in history. This need for conquest was not just military, it was intellectual and existential. His education, under the tutelage of Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of his time, instilled in Alexander a love for knowledge, philosophy, science, and Greek culture. Aristotle taught him about rhetoric, ethics, politics, medicine, and the wonders of the natural world. This comprehensive education shaped Alexander's mind, making him not just a warrior, but a thinker who saw conquest as a mission to spread Hellenic culture and unravel the secrets of the world. However, the influence of his father, Philip II, was equally crucial. Philip had prepared the ground for the invasion of Persia, and Alexander felt the weight of this heritage. He did not just want to continue his father's legacy, he wanted to surpass it, to go beyond known limits and leave his own indelible mark on history. His ambition was vast, and he believed he was destined for great deeds. His need for conquest was fueled by a combination of factors: the pursuit of personal glory, the Greek kleos, revenge for previous Persian invasions, the belief in his own divinity, and the vision of a universal empire that would unite East and West. He saw conquest not just as an act of war, but as a mission, a destiny he was fated to fulfill. This insatiable thirst for conquest would drive him to lead his armies for thousands of kilometers, to face colossal empires, and to overcome challenges that seemed impossible. Alexander was not a man content with the status quo. He was a visionary who saw the world as a stage for his ambition. His journey was just beginning, and the ancient world awaited to be shaped by his sword and his vision.
Alexander the Great's upbringing was not merely military, it was profoundly intellectual, shaped by one of history's greatest thinkers, Aristotle. Philip II, recognizing his son's precocious talent and the importance of a comprehensive education for a future king, hired Aristotle, the renowned philosopher and disciple of Plato, to be Alexander's tutor. For 3 years, from 343 to 340 BCE, Aristotle taught the young prince in Mysa, a sanctuary in Macedon, transforming Alexander's mind in ways that would echo throughout his empire. Alexander's education under Aristotle was encyclopedic. He not only learned about rhetoric and oratory, crucial skills for a leader who needed to inspire and persuade his men, but also delved into ethics and politics, understanding the principles of governance and justice. Aristotle exposed him to the classics of Greek literature, especially the works of Homer. The Iliad, in particular, became Alexander's Bible. He carried it with him on his campaigns, drawing inspiration from Achilles, the warrior hero, and seeking to emulate his glory and bravery. But Aristotle's influence went far beyond literature and philosophy. He instilled in Alexander a deep love for science and empirical knowledge. Alexander studied medicine, biology, zoology, and botany, developing an insatiable curiosity about the natural world. During his campaigns, he would send specimens of plants and animals to Aristotle, contributing to the philosopher's vast knowledge. This scientific curiosity would shape how Alexander approached conquest, not just as an act of war, but as an exploration and a quest for knowledge. Aristotle also taught him about geography and astronomy, giving Alexander an understanding of the known world and the stars that guided him. This comprehensive education, which united philosophy with science and literature, forged in Alexander a multifaceted mind, a warrior, but also a thinker, a conqueror, but also an explorer, a leader who saw conquest as a means to spread Hellenic culture and unravel the secrets of the world. Aristotle's influence would be a pillar in Alexander's life, shaping his vision of an empire that would be not only military, but also cultural and intellectual.
Alexander's education was not limited to scrolls and philosophical debates. It was complemented by rigorous military training and his first experiences on the battlefield under the tutelage of his father, Philip II. From an early age, Alexander was immersed in the art of Macedonian warfare, a fighting machine that Philip had perfected. He learned to ride with mastery, becoming an exceptional horseman,
The legend of Bucephalus, his untamable horse, is a testament to his skill and courage. At 12 years old, Alexander was the only one capable of taming the wild horse, a feat that deeply impressed his father and would become a symbol of his ability to overcome challenges. Bucephalus would be his loyal companion in all his great campaigns, carrying him to the depths of India. Alexander was trained in the use of the sarissa, the long spear of the Macedonian phalanx, and all other weapons of the time. He learned to fight in formation, to maneuver troops, and to understand the logistics of military campaigns. Philip exposed him to the rigors of military life, teaching him discipline, endurance, and the importance of personal leadership on the battlefield. His first major military experience occurred at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE, when Alexander was only 18 years old. In this decisive battle, Philip II's Macedonian forces faced the combined armies of Athens and Thebes. Alexander commanded the companion cavalry, the elite of the Macedonian cavalry, on the left flank. His decisive charge broke the Theban lines, including the famous Sacred Band of Thebes, an elite unit. The victory at Chaeronea sealed Macedonian dominance over Greece and demonstrated Alexander's military genius. This early battlefield experience was crucial for Alexander's formation as a commander. He learned to make decisions under pressure, to inspire his men, and to execute complex tactics. He witnessed the effectiveness of the Macedonian phalanx and the importance of cavalry in flanking maneuvers. His bravery and military skill were evident from an early age, preparing him for the even greater challenges that awaited him as the future king of Macedon.
Alexander's ascension to the Macedonian throne was as dramatic and full of intrigue as his life of conquests. In 336 BCE, as Philip II was preparing to launch his vast expedition against the Persian Empire, he was assassinated in Aegae, the ancient Macedonian capital, during the wedding of his daughter Cleopatra. The assassin was Pausanias of Orestes, one of his bodyguards. The exact reasons for the assassination are shrouded in mystery and speculation, fueling conspiracy theories that point to various factions. One of the most prominent theories suggests the involvement of Olympias, Alexander's mother. Olympias, who had a tempestuous relationship with Philip and had been marginalized after he married Cleopatra, a Macedonian woman who could give him a pure Macedonian heir, would have seen the assassination as an opportunity to secure her son Alexander's succession. Her ambition and ruthless nature made her a strong suspect. Another theory points to Alexander himself. While there is no concrete evidence of his involvement, Philip's death removed a potential obstacle to his own ambitions of leading the invasion of Persia. The relationship between father and son had been tense in recent years, especially after Philip's marriage to Cleopatra and the birth of a son who could threaten Alexander's position as heir. Regardless of the conspirators, Philip II's assassination created an immediate and dangerous power vacuum. Alexander, then 20 years old, acted quickly and decisively to secure his succession. He was proclaimed king by the nobles and the Macedonian army, who saw him as the legitimate heir and the leader capable of continuing his father's legacy. However, his ascension was not without challenges. There were other contenders to the throne and factions that could oppose him. Alexander had to consolidate his power quickly, eliminating rivals and asserting his authority over the nobles and generals. Philip II's death was a seismic event that paved the way for Alexander's ascension, a leader who would take Macedonian ambition to an unprecedented level.
Alexander's ascension to the Macedonian throne, though swift, was not immediately accepted by all Greek city-states. The death of Philip II, the man who had subjugated Greece, was seen by many as an opportunity to break free from Macedonian dominance. Cities like Athens and Thebes, which had been defeated at Chaeronea, saw a chance to reassert their independence and rebelled against the young king. Alexander, however, was not his father. He was faster, more ruthless, and more determined to assert his authority. He acted with a speed and brutality that caught the Greeks by surprise. In 335 BCE, news of his false death, spread by the rebels themselves, led to a revolt in Thebes. Alexander marched south with impressive speed, catching the Thebans unprepared. The siege and destruction of Thebes was a deliberate act of terror, designed to serve as an example for any other Greek city that dared to challenge his authority. After a brutal siege, Thebes was taken, its walls razed, and its population massacred or sold into slavery. Only the temples and the house of the poet Pindar were spared. The destruction of Thebes was a shock to all of Greece, a brutal reminder of Alexander's power and determination. This display of force crushed any other attempts at rebellion. The Greek city-states, terrified by the fate of Thebes, quickly submitted to Alexander's authority. The League of Corinth, the Pan-Hellenic alliance created by Philip II, was reaffirmed, and Alexander was elected its leader, with the goal of leading the invasion of Persia. Alexander's consolidation of power in Greece was a testament to his ruthless leadership and his ability to impose his will. He not only inherited his father's army and empire, he transformed them into an even more effective tool for his own purposes. With Greece firmly under his control, Alexander was ready to look east to the vast and rich Persian Empire, the true object of his ambition. His journey of conquest was about to begin. With Greece firmly under his control, Alexander the Great was ready to realize his father's dream and, more importantly, his own ambition, the invasion of the Persian Empire. It was not just a war of revenge, it was the beginning of an odyssey that would redefine the map of the known world. In 334 BCE, Alexander gathered his army, a force of approximately 48,000 men, composed of Macedonians, Greeks, and allies, and marched to the Hellespont, the Dardanelles Strait, the border between Europe and Asia. The crossing of the Hellespont was a moment laden with symbolism. Alexander, in a gesture that echoed the legend of Achilles, his hero from the Iliad, was the first to land on Asian soil. He threw his spear into the ground, proclaiming that all of Asia would be conquered by the Macedonian spear. This act was not just bravado, it was a declaration of intent, an oath that he would not return home until the Persian Empire was subjugated. His fleet, though smaller than the Persian, ensured the safe crossing of his army. Alexander did not bring with him a vast quantity of supplies or a large treasury. He had emptied the Macedonian treasury to finance the expedition, and his strategy was to live off the land and plunder, a bold tactic that required quick victories to sustain the army. He was staking everything on his ability to conquer and to sustain his troops with the enemy's resources. The crossing of the Hellespont marked the beginning of the greatest military campaign of antiquity. Alexander was not just invading an empire, he was embarking on a journey of discovery, exploration, and conquest that would lead him to distant lands and to confront the greatest armies of his time. The Persian Empire, vast and powerful, was about to feel the fury of a young Macedonian king who knew no limits. His odyssey was just beginning, and the ancient world would never be the same.
Barely had he landed on Asian soil, Alexander and his army were confronted by the Persian forces. The Battle of the Granicus, fought in May 334 BCE on the banks of the Granicus River in Asia Minor, was the first great test for Alexander and his Macedonian army against the Persian Colossus. The Persian forces, composed mainly of Greek mercenaries and Persian cavalry, were positioned on a high bank of the river, awaiting the Macedonian attack. Alexander's generals advised him to wait until dawn to attack, but Alexander, with his impetuousness and his belief in his own luck, decided to attack immediately. He personally led the charge of the companion cavalry, the elite of the Macedonian cavalry, across the river. The charge was fierce and decisive. Alexander, on his horse Bucephalus, was at the forefront, fighting with bravery and risking his own life. He was almost killed in combat, being saved by his generals Clitus the Black and Spithridates. The battle was a massacre for the Persian forces. The Macedonian phalanx, with its long sarissas, crushed the Persian infantry, while Alexander's cavalry outflanked and annihilated the Persian cavalry. The Greek mercenaries in Persian service, who fought bravely, were surrounded and massacred by Alexander's order, who saw them as traitors to the Greek cause. The victory at Granicus was overwhelming, and Persian losses were immense, while Macedonian losses were minimal. The Battle of Granicus was more than a simple military victory. It was a moral and psychological triumph. It demonstrated the superiority of the Macedonian army's tactics and discipline over the Persian forces. It solidified Alexander's reputation as a brilliant military leader and a courageous warrior. News of the victory spread rapidly through Asia Minor, leading many Greek cities to rebel against Persian rule and join Alexander. The door to the conquest of the Persian Empire was open, and Alexander was ready to advance.
After the victory at Granicus, Alexander wasted no time in consolidating his conquests and advancing through Asia Minor. His march was a combination of military conquest and liberation, with the Greek cities of the region acclaiming him as a liberator from the Persian yoke. He was not just an invader, he was the champion of the Hellenic cause, the man who had come to avenge previous Persian invasions. Alexander followed the coast of Asia Minor, taking cities like Sardis, Ephesus, Miletus, and Halicarnassus. In each city, he restored Greek democracies and eliminated pro-Persian tyrants. He was a master of propaganda, presenting himself as the restorer of Greek freedom and the avenger of Greece. His policy of liberation, in contrast to the brutality of his previous campaigns in Greece, like Thebes, aimed to win the support of local populations and undermine Persian authority. However, the march through Asia Minor was not without challenges. In some cities, like Halicarnassus, he faced fierce resistance. Halicarnassus, a strongly fortified city defended by an experienced Persian commander, Memnon of Rhodes, required a prolonged and bloody siege. Alexander demonstrated his persistence and skill in siege tactics, eventually taking the city, but not without heavy losses. Alexander also had to deal with the threat of the Persian fleet, which dominated the Aegean Sea and could threaten his supply lines. Instead of confronting the Persian fleet directly in a naval battle, Alexander opted for a bold strategy. He would take all Persian naval bases along the coast, denying them ports and supplies. This strategy, though time-consuming, would prove effective in neutralizing the Persian naval threat. The march through Asia Minor was a period of learning and consolidation for Alexander. He refined his siege tactics, demonstrated his ability to lead an army on a prolonged campaign, and solidified his support among the Greek populations. He was preparing for the decisive confrontation with the great Persian king Darius III, a confrontation that would decide the fate of two empires and the future of the ancient world.
After the conquest of Asia Minor, Alexander the Great marched south towards Syria in search of the decisive confrontation with the great Persian king Darius III.
Darius, who had underestimated Alexander after the Battle of Granicus, was now gathering a colossal army, composed of hundreds of thousands of warriors from across his vast empire. He was determined to crush the young Macedonian king and restore Persian glory. The Battle of Issus, fought in November 333 BCE on a narrow coastal plain in Syria, was the first direct confrontation between Alexander and Darius III, a true duel of kings that would decide the fate of two empires. The Persian forces were numerically far superior to the Macedonians, but the narrow terrain of Issus denied Darius the advantage of his vast cavalry and overwhelming numbers. Alexander, with his tactical genius, positioned his army to maximize the effectiveness of the Macedonian phalanx and the companion cavalry. He personally led the cavalry charge, attacking the center of the Persian lines where Darius was positioned in his war chariot. Alexander's charge was unstoppable, breaking through the Persian lines and creating panic. Darius III, seeing Alexander's fury approaching, fled the battlefield, abandoning his army, his family, and his treasury. Darius III's flight was a devastating blow to Persian morale. His leaderless troops were massacred by the Macedonian forces. The victory at Issus was overwhelming for Alexander. He captured Darius's family, including his mother, wife, and daughters, his treasury, and vast spoils. Persian losses were immense, while Macedonian losses were minimal. The Battle of Issus was a spectacular military triumph for Alexander. It demonstrated his tactical genius, his personal bravery, and the superiority of his army over the vast but disorganized Persian forces. Darius III's flight was a humiliation for the great king and a sign that the Persian Empire was in decline. Alexander had defeated the King of Kings in open battle, and the path to the conquest of the East was now unobstructed.
After the victory at Issus, Alexander the Great did not march directly into the heart of the Persian Empire. Instead, he decided to secure his rear and deny the Persian fleet any naval bases in the eastern Mediterranean. His next stop was the city of Tyre, a powerful Phoenician island city known for its impenetrable fortifications and its loyalty to the Persian Empire. The siege of Tyre, 332 BCE, was one of the greatest and most challenging sieges in ancient history, a testament to Alexander's persistence and ingenuity. Tyre was located on an island about 800 meters from the coast, protected by massive walls and a powerful naval fleet. To conquer the city, Alexander ordered the construction of a causeway, a land bridge that would connect the mainland to the island, an engineering feat that took months to complete. The defenders of Tyre resisted bravely, launching naval attacks against the causeway and using siege engines to repel Macedonian assaults. Alexander, in his fury and determination, personally led the siege operations, building floating siege towers and using catapults to bombard the city walls. His persistence was relentless. After 7 months of brutal siege, Tyre finally fell. Alexander's revenge was terrible. Most of the male population was massacred, and the women and children were sold into slavery, a cruel fate that served as an example for any other city that dared to resist him. The destruction of Tyre was a deliberate act of terror, designed to break the will of any future opponent. After Tyre, Alexander marched south towards Gaza, another fortified city that resisted bravely. The siege of Gaza was equally brutal, and the city was also taken and its population massacred. The conquest of Tyre and Gaza secured Alexander's control over the eastern Mediterranean coast, neutralizing the Persian naval threat and opening the way to Egypt. His determination to leave no enemies in his rear was a characteristic of his strategy, and he did not hesitate to use brutality to achieve his objectives.
After the conquest of the eastern Mediterranean coast, Alexander the Great marched south towards Egypt. Egypt, one of the richest and most strategic provinces of the Persian Empire, was governed by a Persian satrap. However, the Egyptian population, which had suffered under Persian rule, saw Alexander as a liberator. Alexander's conquest of Egypt was remarkably peaceful. The Persian forces, demoralized by previous defeats and with no hope of reinforcements, offered little resistance. Alexander was welcomed as a liberator by the Egyptians, who acclaimed him as a pharaoh and a son of the gods. He visited Egyptian temples, consulted priests, and presented himself as the restorer of Egyptian order and tradition. During his stay in Egypt, Alexander performed an act that would become one of his most enduring legacies, the founding of the city of Alexandria. In 331 BCE, he chose a strategic location on the Mediterranean coast, near a good natural harbor, to build a new city. Alexandria was designed to be a center of trade, culture, and learning, a bridge between East and West, and a symbol of Alexander's new Hellenistic empire. The city would be built with wide streets, magnificent buildings, and a great library that would become the largest center of knowledge in the ancient world. Alexander also visited the famous Oracle of Amun in the Siwa oasis in the western Egyptian desert. There, he was acclaimed as a son of Amun, the Egyptian equivalent of Zeus, a recognition of his divinity that he would embrace and use to legitimize his rule. This visit to the oracle reinforced his belief in his own divine destiny and his mission to conquer the world. The conquest of Egypt and the founding of Alexandria were crucial moments in Alexander's journey. He not only added a rich province to his empire, but also established a solid foundation for the future, a city that would become a beacon of culture and knowledge for centuries. With Egypt firmly under his control, Alexander was ready for the final confrontation with the great Persian king, Darius III, a confrontation that would decide the fate of two empires and the future of the world.
After the conquest of Egypt, Alexander the Great marched east in search of the final confrontation with the great Persian king, Darius III. Darius, who had fled the Battle of Issus, had gathered an even larger army, composed of hundreds of thousands of warriors from across his vast empire, including war elephants and scythed chariots. He was determined to crush Alexander and restore Persian glory. The Battle of Gaugamela, fought on October 1, 331 BCE on a vast plain near modern-day Mosul, Iraq, was the decisive confrontation between Alexander and Darius III, the battle that would decide the fate of the Persian Empire and the future of the ancient world. The Persian forces were numerically far superior to the Macedonians, but Alexander, with his tactical genius, managed to neutralize Darius's numerical advantage. Alexander, aware of the Persian numerical superiority, planned a bold strategy. He positioned his army in an oblique formation, with the Macedonian phalanx in the center and the companion cavalry on the flanks. He used a tactic known as hammer and anvil, where the companion cavalry, the hammer, attacked the enemy flank, while the phalanx, the anvil, held the center. The battle was chaotic and bloody. The Persian scythed chariots, though terrifying, were neutralized by Macedonian tactics. The Persian war elephants, though imposing, were not decisive. Alexander, personally leading the charge of the companion cavalry, attacked the Persian right flank, creating a breach in the enemy lines. He then wheeled his forces and attacked the Persian center, where Darius was positioned. Darius III, seeing Alexander's fury approaching and the collapse of his lines, fled the battlefield again, abandoning his army and his empire. Darius's flight was the final blow to the Persian Empire. His demoralized and leaderless troops were massacred by the Macedonian forces. The victory at Gaugamela was overwhelming for Alexander. He had defeated the Persian Empire on its own soil in a battle of epic proportions. The Battle of Gaugamela marked the end of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Alexander had conquered the largest empire in the known world, and his name would become synonymous with the Great. The path to the conquest of the East was now completely open, and Alexander was ready to march into the heart of Persia, to the cities of Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, and beyond, in search of new horizons and a universal empire.
After the overwhelming victory at Gaugamela, the path to the heart of the Persian Empire was open. Alexander the Great wasted no time. His march to the great Persian capitals was not just a military conquest, it was a symbolic appropriation of the power he had defeated. The first great capital to fall was Babylon, the legendary city with its hanging gardens and imposing walls offered no resistance. The priests and inhabitants of Babylon welcomed Alexander as a liberator, tired of Persian rule. Alexander, in a gesture of respect and political intelligence, ordered the Babylonian temples to be restored and local religious rituals to be respected. He presented himself not as an invader, but as the new legitimate ruler, a successor to the ancient Babylonian kings. His entry into Babylon was a spectacle of pomp and acclamation, a moment of triumph and recognition of his new authority. From Babylon, Alexander marched to Susa, another of the Persian capitals, where the great king Darius III kept one of his main treasures. Susa also surrendered without a fight, and Alexander seized vast riches, including gold, silver, and jewels, which would be crucial to finance his future campaigns and reward his soldiers. In Susa, Alexander began to adopt some Persian customs, such as wearing Persian attire, an act that, though pragmatic for governing such a diverse empire, would begin to cause friction with his own Macedonian generals, who saw it as an orientalization of their king. But the true symbol of Persian power was Persepolis, the ceremonial city, built by Darius I and Xerxes I, was the spiritual and political heart of the Achaemenid Empire. In 330 BCE, Alexander arrived at Persepolis. The city was plundered, and in an act that is still a subject of historical debate today, the royal palace was burned. Legend has it that Alexander, in a moment of drunkenness, and perhaps under the influence of an Athenian courtesan, Thais, ordered the burning as an act of revenge for the Persian invasions of Greece. Other historians suggest that it was a deliberate act of destruction, a symbol of the end of the Persian Empire and the rise of Hellenic dominance. The burning of Persepolis was an act of cataclysm, a symbol of the annihilation of an empire and the rise of a new power. The conquest of Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis marked the definitive fall of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Alexander had conquered the largest empire in the known world, and his name would become synonymous with the Great. However, his ambition would not be content with the conquest of Persia. He would look beyond, to the ends of the world.
With the fall of the Persian capitals, the great king Darius III was now a fugitive. Humiliated by the defeats at Issus and Gaugamela, and abandoned by his own generals and satraps, Darius desperately tried to gather a new army in the eastern provinces of his empire. Alexander the Great, relentless in his pursuit, was determined to capture Darius and consolidate his conquest of the Persian Empire. The pursuit of Darius was long and arduous, leading Alexander and his army through vast and inhospitable regions of the Persian Empire. Alexander, with his speed and determination, was always one step ahead of his enemies. He did not just want to defeat Darius, he wanted to capture him alive, to display him in a triumph, and legitimize his own ascension as the new great king of Persia. However, Darius III's fate would be sealed not by Alexander's hands, but by those of his own generals. In 330 BCE, as Alexander approached,
Darius was assassinated by Bessus, his own satrap of Bactria, and other Persian nobles. They hoped to hand Darius's body over to Alexander to gain the conqueror's favor, or perhaps to seize control of the eastern provinces. Alexander, upon finding Darius's body, is said to have shown a mixture of fury and respect. Fury at Bessus's betrayal, who had murdered his king, and respect for the man who had been his great rival. Alexander ordered Darius's body to be treated with all royal honors and to be buried in the royal tomb at Persepolis alongside his ancestors. This act of respect, in contrast to the brutality of his other actions, aimed to gain the loyalty of the Persian nobles and legitimize his own position as Darius's successor. The death of Darius III marked the end of the Achaemenid dynasty and the completion of Alexander's conquest of the Persian Empire. There was no longer a Persian great king to challenge him. Alexander was now the lord of a vast empire stretching from Greece to Egypt and the heart of Persia. However, his ambition would not be content with this conquest. He would look beyond, to the ends of the world, in search of new horizons and a universal empire.
With the Persian Empire firmly under his control, Alexander the Great was ready to embark on his greatest and most ambitious campaign, the march to India. It was not just a military conquest, it was a quest for the ends of the known world, an odyssey that would lead him to legendary lands and to confront exotic armies. His ambition knew no limits, and he believed he was destined to reach the outer ocean, the edge of the world. The march to India, begun in 327 BCE, was an epic journey through vast and inhospitable regions. Alexander and his army crossed modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan, facing mountainous terrain, arid deserts, and fierce tribes that resisted tenaciously. His ability to lead his men through such adversities, to maintain discipline and morale in extreme conditions, was a testament to his leadership. The campaign in India was marked by a series of brutal sieges and bloody battles against the Indian kingdoms. Alexander faced armies with tactics and weapons different from what he had encountered in Persia, including war elephants, which were a terrifying sight for his soldiers. He had to adapt his tactics and strategy to deal with these new challenges. His pursuit of glory and new horizons led him to explore rivers and mountains, to found new cities, many of them named after him, like Alexandria and Bactria, and to absorb knowledge about Indian cultures and philosophies. Alexander was not just a conqueror, he was an explorer, a man who sought to expand the limits of human knowledge. However, the march to India would also reveal the limits of Alexander's ambition. His men were exhausted by years of continuous campaigning, far from their homes and families. Indian resistance was fierce, and the prospect of continuing to march east into the unknown began to cause discontent among his troops. India would be the farthest point of his journey, the limit of his empire, and the stage of his greatest challenge.
Alexander's march to India culminated in one of his greatest and most challenging confrontations, the Battle of the Hydaspes, fought in 326 BCE on the banks of the Hydaspes River, present-day Jhelum River, in Pakistan. The enemy was King Porus, an Indian ruler of great stature and courage, who commanded a formidable army, including hundreds of war elephants, a terrifying sight for the Macedonians. The Hydaspes River was swollen and swift, making crossing difficult. Porus had positioned his elephants on the opposite bank, creating an impenetrable barrier. Alexander, with his tactical genius, devised a bold plan to deceive Porus. He performed a series of diversionary maneuvers, moving his troops along the river, making Porus believe he would attempt a crossing at different points. Meanwhile, Alexander, with an elite force, managed to cross the river at a distant and unexpected point, catching Porus completely by surprise.
The battle that ensued was chaotic and brutal. Porus's war elephants, though initially terrifying, were neutralized by Macedonian tactics. The Macedonians used their sarissas to attack the elephants and their handlers, and the wounded elephants turned against their own troops, causing panic. Alexander, personally leading the companion cavalry, attacked the flanks of the Indian army while the Macedonian phalanx held the center. The battle was fierce, and Porus fought with remarkable bravery even after being wounded. He refused to flee, and his courage deeply impressed Alexander. The victory at the Battle of the Hydaspes belonged to Alexander, but it was a costly victory. Macedonian losses were significant, and the army was exhausted. Porus's bravery and the ferocity of the Indian army showed Alexander that the conquest of India would be much more difficult than he imagined. However, Alexander, in a gesture of respect for his courage, treated Porus with honor, allowing him to keep his kingdom and even expand his dominions, making him an ally. The Battle of the Hydaspes was Alexander's last major confrontation and the farthest point of his conquests.
After the costly victory at the Battle of the Hydaspes, Alexander the Great was determined to continue his march east, to the ends of India in search of the outer ocean. He believed that true glory lay in reaching the limits of the known world. However, his boundless ambition clashed with the exhaustion and discontent of his own men. The Macedonian army had fought for almost a decade, traversing thousands of kilometers, facing bloody battles, disease, and privation. They were far from their homes, their families, and the prospect of continuing to march into the unknown to face even more numerous armies and war elephants was overwhelming. The morale of the troops was at its lowest point. In 326 BCE, on the banks of the Hyphasis River, present-day Bias River in India, Alexander's army refused to go further. The soldiers, exhausted and disillusioned, mutinied. They pleaded with Alexander to let them return home. Alexander, in his fury and frustration, tried to persuade them, appealing to their loyalty and their ambition for glory. He reminded them of their past victories and the promise of future riches. However, for the first time in his career, Alexander's eloquence and charisma failed. His men were determined. They had reached their limits, and the prospect of continuing to fight in unknown lands was unbearable. After 3 days of stalemate, Alexander reluctantly conceded. He understood that forcing his men to continue would be a fatal mistake, one that could lead to a large-scale rebellion. The mutiny at the Hyphasis River was a crucial moment in Alexander's life. It marked the limit of his ambition, and the first time his men refused to obey him. It was a personal defeat for the conqueror, a reminder that even the greatest leader depended on the will of his soldiers. From that moment, Alexander would be forced to change his plans and begin the long and arduous journey back to the west. India would be the farthest point of his journey, the limit of his empire, and the stage of his greatest lesson.
With the ambition of conquering the ends of the world frustrated by the mutiny at the Hyphasis River, Alexander the Great began the long and arduous journey back to the west. It would not be a triumphant return, but an ordeal that would reveal the price of conquest and the fragility of the human body. Alexander divided his army into 2 parts. One part, under the command of his admiral Nearchus, would sail down the Indus River to the Indian Ocean and then along the coast, exploring new maritime routes. The other part, led by Alexander, would march overland through the Gadrosian Desert, present-day Balochistan in Pakistan and Iran, one of the most arid and inhospitable regions in the world. The march through the Gadrosian Desert was a nightmare.
Alexander's army faced scorching heat, lack of water and food, and sandstorms. Thousands of soldiers and animals died of thirst, hunger, and exhaustion. Discipline, which had been the hallmark of the Macedonian army, began to deteriorate. Alexander, however, shared his men's privations, walking on foot, refusing to drink water when his soldiers had none, inspiring them with his own example of endurance. The return journey was a period of great suffering and loss, but also of exploration and discovery. Alexander continued to explore new lands, found cities, and absorbed knowledge about local cultures. He dedicated himself to consolidating his empire, suppressing revolts by satraps, and reorganizing the administration. He also sought to integrate Persian elements into his army and court, an act that would continue to generate friction with his Macedonian generals. The return journey was a testament to the resilience of Alexander and his army, but also a reminder of the human cost of conquest. He had reached the limits of the known world, but the price was high. His health, already weakened by years of continuous campaigning, would begin to decline. Alexander was returning home, but the man who had left for Asia was no longer the same.
After years of relentless conquests, strenuous marches, and legendary victories, the life of Alexander the Great came to an abrupt and unexpected end. In June 323 BCE, in Babylon, the conqueror of the world succumbed to an illness at the age of 32. His death, at the height of his power and ambition, shocked the world and plunged his vast empire into a chaos of succession. The exact circumstances of his death are shrouded in mystery and speculation, fueling debates among historians to this day. The most accepted theories suggest that Alexander died of an illness, possibly typhoid fever, malaria, or West Nile fever, exacerbated by years of privation, battle wounds, and excessive alcohol consumption. He had suffered countless injuries in his campaigns, and his body was exhausted. However, there are also conspiracy theories that point to poisoning. Some accounts suggest that he was poisoned by his own generals, tired of his boundless ambitions and his increasing orientalization. Others point to Antipater, his regent in Macedon, who allegedly sent poison through his son. Regardless of the exact cause, the fact is that Alexander, the man who had conquered the largest empire in the world, met his end in a bed and not on the battlefield, as he himself perhaps wished. In his last days, Alexander was weakened, unable to speak, but still conscious. When asked to whom he would leave his empire, he reportedly replied, "To the strongest, toi kratistoi," a phrase that would seal the fate of his empire and lead to decades of wars among his generals. His death marked the end of an era. The man who had dreamed of uniting East and West, of creating a universal empire, departed, leaving behind a legacy of glory, but also of uncertainty and fragmentation. The world he had shaped was about to be redefined by the ambition of his successors.
Alexander the Great's death left an immense power vacuum. He had not named a clear successor, and his vast and heterogeneous empire was immediately disputed by his generals, the diadochi, literally successors. Alexander's dream of a unified and universal empire collapsed into a series of bloody wars that would last for decades. The main diadochi, such as Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, Cassander, and Lysimachus, fought among themselves for control of Alexander's vast lands. They were ambitious and capable men who had served Alexander with distinction, but who now saw the opportunity to forge their own kingdoms. The wars of the diadochi were brutal, with alliances forming and dissolving, and battles that would reshape the map of the ancient world. Eventually, Alexander's empire was divided into several Hellenistic kingdoms, each ruled by a dynasty founded by one of his generals. The Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, founded by Ptolemy I Soter, who established a dynasty that would rule Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, with Cleopatra VII being the last of his descendants. Alexandria would become a beacon of culture and knowledge. The Seleucid Empire in Asia, founded by Seleucus I Nicator, who controlled most of the former Persian Empire, stretching from Asia Minor to India. The Kingdom of Macedon, governed by Antigonus I Monophlonous and his descendants, the Antigonids, who maintained control of the Macedonian homeland and Greece. This division marked the beginning of the Hellenistic era, a period of about 3 centuries, 323 BCE to 31 BCE, that saw the dissemination of Greek culture, Hellenism, throughout the Near East. Although Alexander's empire did not remain united, his legacy was the fusion of Greek and Eastern cultures, the founding of numerous cities, many of them named after him, and the creation of a more interconnected world. The Hellenistic kingdoms would become centers of learning, trade, and art, and Greek influence would spread across vast regions. Alexander's ambition had, paradoxically, led to the creation of a world that, though fragmented, was more Greek than ever.
The impact of Alexander the Great on the world was immense and multifaceted, a complex tapestry of conquest, cultural fusion, and transformation. He was not just a conqueror, he was a catalyst for change on an unprecedented scale. One of his most enduring legacies was the dissemination of Hellenism. Alexander, with his passion for Greek culture instilled by Aristotle, brought the Greek language, philosophy, art, architecture, and political institutions to the vast lands he conquered. The founding of numerous cities, many of them named Alexandria, served as centers of Greek culture in the East, attracting Greeks and Macedonians to settle and spread their culture. This fusion of Greek and Eastern elements created a new hybrid culture, Hellenism, which would influence the world for centuries, serving as a bridge between East and West. In warfare, Alexander revolutionized military tactics. He demonstrated the effectiveness of the Macedonian phalanx, combined with heavy cavalry, the importance of logistics and siege engineering, and the genius of personal leadership on the battlefield. His campaigns became case studies for future generals, and his army a model of discipline and effectiveness. Economically, his conquests opened new trade routes and boosted trade between East and West. The vast wealth of the Persian Empire, which was released and circulated through the Mediterranean economy, spurred economic growth and the development of new cities and commercial centers. Politically, Alexander broke the power of the Persian Empire, which had dominated the East for centuries, and paved the way for the emergence of new kingdoms and dynasties. Although his empire fragmented, the idea of a universal empire and the centralization of power he implemented would influence future rulers. Alexander also had an impact on science and exploration. He brought scientists, geographers, and historians with him on his campaigns, who recorded their discoveries about the flora, fauna, and cultures of the lands he conquered. His quest for the ends of the world expanded geographical knowledge and inspired future explorations. Alexander's legacy is therefore a transformative force that, though born of conquest, shaped the world in profound and lasting ways.
Alexander the Great, the name that resonates through millennia, the conqueror who united 3 continents and whose legacy continues to fascinate and inspire. His figure, already legendary in life, would transform into a myth that would transcend cultures and epochs. For the Greeks and Macedonians, he was the supreme hero, the invincible warrior who had avenged Greece and spread Hellenic culture throughout the world. For the Romans, he was the model general and emperor, an inspiration for leaders like Julius Caesar and Augustus. For the Islamic world,
He was Iskandar Dual-Qarnayn, the Alexander of two horns, a reference to a crown or his two empires, a legendary figure of wisdom and justice who traveled to the ends of the earth. The myth of Alexander is multifaceted. He is portrayed as a military genius, a brilliant strategist, a charismatic leader who inspired loyalty and devotion in his men. But he is also seen as a man of unlimited ambition, a tyrant who committed acts of brutality and succumbed to the excesses of power. This duality in his image reflects the complexity of his figure and the difficulty in separating the man from the myth. His story has inspired countless works of literature, art, cinema, and music. From ancient historians like Plutarch and Arrian to modern films and video games, Alexander continues to be a source of fascination. He is a symbol of the human quest for glory, for knowledge, and for overcoming known limits. His life is a testament to the power of a single individual to shape the destiny of millions and to leave an indelible mark on history. Alexander the Great, the conqueror who in just 13 years built an empire stretching from Greece to India, uniting East and West. His life was an epic saga of ambition, genius, and sacrifice, a testament to the power of a visionary leader. He taught us that limits are only those we impose on ourselves, and that the pursuit of glory can lead to immortality. His story is an invitation to reflect on the price of conquest, the complexity of leadership, and the enduring power of ideals. The world Alexander left behind was a melting pot of cultures and ideas, a stage for the emergence of new empires and civilizations. But Greece itself, his homeland, would continue to be a center of thought and power, even under the rule of his successors.